Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, your nice audience. And so big data, Imagine Europe. This is a super interesting debate that we have about digital and trust. This is not the time of trust. Edelman Trust Barometer, which came out in the last weeks, says that distrust is the default. The situation has probably gone worse with the war and with all the consequences of it. So trust is not only something that you can lose, it's something that you need to conquer, to find, to demonstrate, to create. We have, as everybody knows here, the first panel about the description of a very long research result that has been created by So Big Data, and it's about how to have a digital ecosystem of trust. Europe is a special place for this, and we will see in the next panels what this means. But we need to start from the beginning, and the beginning is a paper towards a digital ecosystem of trust. We have Giovanni Comandé, full professor in comparative private law at Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna di Pisa. Josep Domingo-Ferrer, professor of computer science at ICREA-Acadèmia, researcher at Universitat Rovira e Virgili, Tarragona, Catalonia. Francesca Pratesi, postdoc fellow at computer science department at the University of Pisa. They will share the floor in order to let us know what the paper says. It is clearly a way to discuss about the role of AI, machines, automations in our society. There is nothing more debated in terms of the future of digital society. The idea, the general synthetic idea, is that we can have trust in the digital ecosystem if the digital ecosystem is transparent, understandable. But is that enough? How to make this, and where we go from here? Giovanni Comandé.
Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be here, and I will be just sharing some slides, but I do not want to provide disincentives to read this first results that we published. So I will start from the end instead of starting from the beginning. That is the further steps. What we have done, and I don't know if the slides are shared already, what we have done jointly in this interdisciplinary efforts is trying to analyze and start to share the elements of a digital ecosystem of trust. So in order to do it, in order to have it, to develop it, we definitely do need robust and innovative technologies. We need human relationship of trust and a clear legal and ethics framework. Now, in the paper, we try to start, it's only a process that it will be a never-ending story in a sense, to bring together the various technologies, and I think that Josep and Francesca will be saying much more on that, and trying to link them to their clear legal framework and ethical framework, which we are all aware it's in evolution. It's a framework that is continuously evolution. Now, remembering what has been said just a moment ago, an ecosystem of trust in the digital age is clearly axed on clear values of reference. And these clear values of reference in the evolution of the European Union approach to the digital in broad terms It's a blending of existing legislation and forthcoming have been evoked, and I will be touching upon a couple of them very, very soon. But especially they are related to common ethical principles shared within the European Union, and those shared ones are enshrined in the joint understanding of the protection of fundamental rights. So we can trust the technologies we are developing, as long as those technologies help us protecting fundamental rights, don't hinder them. In a process of continuous balance between innovation, we do want to foster innovation in technological terms, because the innovation in terms enhance protection of the well-being of citizens and human and mankind. Now, in this interplay, there are many layers of regulation that we had to take into account. Only few of them we could take into account in this first paper, of course, trying to see how they contribute to developing an ecosystem of trust, which again, it's only the output of the convergence of those three elements. And of course, one of the main issues that we had to overcome to start building upon, it's trying to not only demonstrate that the legal framework is not just a bunch of roadblocks to innovation, to sharing, to data sharing, but it can be, and that's what we tried to start demonstrating in this paper, and a leverage for innovation. A tools to expand the scope of data sharing in line with the European Union strategy. So an ecosystem of trust can emerge if we are able to stick to our motto, as close as necessary, as open as possible. Data should be an ecosystem, a digital ecosystem can be really reliable if it is able to balance openness of data, interoperability, access, and all the rest, and closing it. So there's regulating access to the data, closing and opening the doors to data sharing in different ways at the minimum level. That is the minimum level of closeness, which is necessary to enable data sharing in the various ways that they are summarized in these slides without hindering fundamental rights and liberties. That's the key tenets, that's the key ingredient that we are trying to bring into new technologies. The goal is, of course, a data agile society. And I say that it's an ongoing work. So this first paper is only a first step opening to further layers, because the regulations that I displayed before are just clearly only one part of the picture. And the picture is dramatically changing in continue. And those are just a list. Now, what we are trying to do in the So Big Data++, what are we trying to do at this committee level, it's trying to bring together these elements. Now, if, and all we agree, I guess, otherwise we wouldn't be here, the goal of the European Union is to create a dynamic data economy, which, for instance, AI that has been by Luca evoked several times in its introduction, plays a central role. We can do it only, to my understanding at least, if we try to pursue these goals. That is, increasing trust in data sharing. Why? And the first lines are basically a tweaking in the words in the introduction of the Data Act, because we want to increase trust, to reduce disincentives, economics, and not only economics, disincentives in sharing data. The whole idea is to reach the maximum extent, the maximum potential of the data-driven society. And we are all aware that the technologies we are developing, the explainability that my colleagues will be dealing with later on, and other techniques for privacy-preserving technologies, for instance, are only one part of this picture. A more large part, but I am the jurist of the group, so that's a little bit biased from my part. A larger role, I would say, because it's more horizontal one, it's played by the legal framework, which is under construction. And in order to being able to really set up an ecosystem of digital trust, of trust in the digital sphere, we need to, and these are the step forwards envisioned by the paper as well, try to expand the alignment between the horizontal framework partially existing, the GDPR, for instance, and partially coming, the Data Act, again, as an example. So one way of increasing trust, it's increasing the ingredients that lead to the sharing of the data. So if we keep moving along this line, technologies should be able to empower data sharing by enabling effective data portability. What does it mean in all the dimensions that we have been exploring, starting to explore, I would say, a better way in the paper? It means trying to define and develop innovative technologies that actually enable portability. This means also trying to find in a pragmatical way standards to operationalize interoperability. There's a lot of talks about interoperability, but still, we don't have a clear standard for data portability under the GDPR. We have broad definitions. We don't have still tools, and the GDPR is in place since it's in place since 2016. It's fully effective since 2018. So we do need to improve our technological abilities, but we do need all at the same time to align the different regulations. Why? Otherwise, we would run the risk to transform what is an enabler, the legal and ethical framework. That's our understanding within the European Union. The legal and ethical framework, the protection of fundamental rights, should be an enabler of innovation, not the other way around, not a mere road blockers. Although we are aware that nothing comes with free meals, there are costs in holding on fundamental rights and liberties, right? So, how we can avoid to transform the legal framework in roadblocks? This is basically a red thread that has aligned the work in preparation of the paper and in preparation of the forthcoming products that we are working on. And one way, at least this is my understanding of the work we have done, it's to see legislation, you will forgive the playing with words, as part of the coding of the developing of the technology. So we have to embroil and embed the ethical and legal dimension directly in the technology. How can we do it? And I will just use the next 3 minutes I do have to display some forthcoming lines, some further studies, further research, as is always said at the end of every paper, as at the end of our paper. Now, we have been dealing in the paper with the research exception, with the possibility of expanding further use, secondary use of data. So one of the questions that remains, for instance, open, and that most probably could be started to be answered either in interpretive terms or directly by the European Union legislator, for instance, whether or not the so-called research exception that we find under Article 9, Paragraph 2, letter J, for sensitive data, does it really always need to have a preliminary legal basis under Article 6? I mean, the texts are there. So in interpretive terms, if we want to expand the use and the sharing of data, we need to find interpretive ways or eventually amendments of the GDPR that clearly drive us into the ability to expand the further use of data. And again, this can be done probably with the help of the European Data Protection Board on the one end, or by trying to leverage the possibility of reforms for coherence between the Data Act and the GDPR. Of course, this last part is not taken care in the paper because those proposed legislation was not fully aware as it is today, but this just to display the direction we are trying to design with the paper. A second, maybe more problematic example that again goes, if the ecosystem of trust makes sense if we can share data. Otherwise, we cannot leverage to the full extent the digital and the data-driven richness of the society and economy. So if we look to the data portability in the existing horizontal and the forthcoming horizontal piece of the framework, we already see in the text this possibility of leveraging and expanding the empowering ability, the enabling ability of the GDPR instead of its risk of being a roadblock to innovation and to trust. So for instance, the text of the Data Act clearly seems to open up the reaching scope of Article 20 of the GDPR in terms of portability, implying that inferred data actually, and I have never doubted, are personal data. So some form of control of portability should be there. Now, if we want to enable these instances, and we want to avoid the most dangerous roadblock in a legal framework, which is legal uncertainty, we should be able to clarify, for instance, and that's why I put the reference to Article 6, the fact that prohibiting the third-party recipient of the data to use the data to develop a product or related service in competition with the original purpose for which the data were gathered in a product or a service cannot mean improving the service. It can only means that data ported cannot be used to develop a competitive product. Doesn't block innovation in the competing products or service toward which data are ported. Otherwise, we are transforming a marvelous opportunity for data sharing and increasing trust into a roadblock, because inside of legal uncertainty, it would be rather doubtful that any third-party recipient would receive data. Last but not least, I will close with a question. What about standards? I commented at the beginning that it is now more than 4 years we have the GDPR with us, that we have the right portability, but still there is no clear framework for technological and for also legal portability, interoperability of the data. So we need to push forward and move forward in that direction from the technological point of view, but also within each sector, because we cannot just have technical interoperability, so from machine readability of the data, without a clear understanding of what is the hardcore, for instance, of metadata in specific sector. To close with an example, think about genomic data. Unless there is a clear understanding what is the minimum level of data which remain useful for research purposes, for delivering back to the clinical level insights by machine learning, we won't be able to really set up an ecosystem of trust, not even for research and not even for a very specific, detailed sector in which the European Union has invested already a lot. But I will stop there eventually.
Thank you.
For questions.
Thank you. I remind the panel that you just have 5 minutes left.
Yeah, my topic here is technologies that enable to create trust. And it is very often argued that, or sometimes at least, argued that Europe's strong privacy regulations are an obstacle to the scientific and economic progress that would result from massive data collection and processing. But we cannot, nonetheless, tolerate such unlimited collection and processing of personal data because it clashes with fundamental rights and ethical values such as privacy, autonomy, fairness, and security. And therefore, we need to come to terms between the progress and also the ethical values. And we think that this effort to come to terms can also spur technology innovation. So when things are a bit more difficult, then you really have a stimulus to do better. And privacy technologies are in fact the solution, the workhorse that can protect digital assets, and in particular to protect privacy by design. And we think that this legal framework and the technical expertise that is in Europe places our area, our bloc, in a very good position to take the lead in innovation on privacy-preserving technologies and more generally on ethics by design technologies. But we cannot ignore that there are also threats. We see that the big internet companies are not European. The big tech companies are not European, and that's for some reason. One of the reasons is very probably that Europe's digital market is more fragmented than in competing blocs like USA and China. And this goes a long way towards explaining the smaller size of our ICT key players and the greater difficulty to take ideas from papers into products. So let's say in the United States, you have a big market. So if you manage to launch a successful product in that initial big market, then you already have a financial strength that allows you to tackle smaller markets. In Europe, we don't yet have a unified market. So your local market or national market is rather small, and it doesn't give you, even in case of success, sufficient strength to tackle global expansion. So that might be a reason. There are promising design principles to produce successful privacy by design and ethics by design technologies. One is decentralization. We now have, all of us, powerful personal computing devices, like, for example, smartphones, which can carry a fair amount of computation. And this opens the possibility of decentralized machine learning, for example, federated learning, decentralized anonymization, decentralized COVID contact tracing, and many other decentralized applications that we have seen lately. There must be, however, in such a decentralized environment, some incentivization for players to participate. Because if participants are not willing to participate, to play the roles that are ascribed to them in the protocols, nothing will work. Without proper incentives, a rational participant may prefer not to join, to deviate from the prescribed behavior, to free ride, or simply drop out. And we can see that very recently we have seen a rather painful experience, which is the poor uptake of COVID-19 contact tracing. And this illustrates the problem of incentives. I designed years ago a co-utility approach, which tries to design protocols so that all participants have incentives to go on. Within Europe, what we can do? Well, we could really aim at a seal like IT Made in Europe, which might be a synonym of ethics compliant technology. There is a strong regulatory framework that we can lean on. For example, the AI regulations that are looming in Europe. Data protection by design is also mandated by the General Data Protection Regulation. And since software can be viewed as transposing regulations to the world of machines, well, that should follow. But there are also threats. Implementing and deploying ethics by design may encounter, and in fact it is encountering, opposition from the industry that bases its profits on data analytics. We are very recently seeing this famous Facebook versus European Commission conflict. That is only one of the conflicts that are going on. What have we done in Big Data? Well, we have prepared several solutions for data protection and data management. that provide the following properties: non-discrimination, misinformation detection, explainability, and also anonymization. And well, I guess I don't have time to go into details describing these properties, but you have them in the slide. These are the technologies, for example, that we have prepared to meet these anonymization and anti-discrimination requirements. K-anonymity, T-closeness, differential privacy, they are privacy models that should allow anonymization of data. Then we also have disclosure risk assessment and discrimination prevention techniques. And those are already implemented and available. What are we doing right now? We are preparing training materials because just as important as the technologies themselves is disseminating the way they work so that you don't need to study a degree or a PhD in ethics by design or in IT to implement them. So we are preparing training materials for people to be able to use those technologies in an easy way. And that is my share. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Francesca Pratesi, and I'm here to talk a little bit about an example that try to put in place the principle that the Professor Domingo-Ferrer just showed you. So first of all, a very brief introduction of what is the aim of the Subit data ecosystem. So we are starting from a variety of data, analytical models, and infrastructure, and we want with this data to provide services and tools that are able to enhance open data, for example, and to improve the use of data scientists, but also to improve the benefit for society, for example, improving the public goods, and also a focus also to the industry. All this process, in all the steps of the process, data ethics is always the first things that we considered. We develop within the project 6 thematic clusters that we call exploratories. Each cluster has a different focus on the different part of human life. So we have, for example, sustainable city of citizen, which is the focus of this presentation, which is related to smart cities and human mobility, but also migration studies exploratory that is focused on human flows and on integration of migration. Online debates, where the focus is on social media and all the problems that are related to the discussion on social media, such as fake news and misinformation. Demographic, economic, and finance, where we analyze both the financial part aspects, such as financial transaction, GDP index, retail data, but also aspects more related more to the general well-being of individuals. And finally, explainable machine learning, which try to explain the decision behind machine learning algorithm. And sport data science, which is focused on sports, so especially soccer and cycling. And here the focus is to try to predict the performance and the best training session for players. So, as I told you, the focus here is on, and the paper is on City of Citizen, where we want to start from this kind of raw data. These are actual GPS track in the area of Pisa and Florence in Italy. And we want to transform this data in actual knowledge. So this is more or less the same information, but well represented. So this can be used, for example, for the municipality to understand if there are some road, some area that needs some improvement, and to reduce traffic jam. And this is also beneficial for the entire collectivity. The data that we can use for this purpose are from a variety of data sources. So we started from GPS track, but also ride sharing or car sharing services, as well as wearable devices are optimum for this purpose. And of course, also mobile phone call can be used for tracking human mobility, because we can monitoring the cell that is serving the phone call. Unfortunately, this kind of data have a very fine level of detail, so they can put at risk the individual privacy of the data subject involved. And we want to be sure that no harm in this sense can be done to the data subject. So I really want to show a very brief example about a service that an application that we implemented in the Subit Data project, where the focus is on privacy. But as Professor Domingo-Ferrer just said, privacy is only one on the aspect that we consider. We have this application that we call Sociometer that want to estimate, given the use of mobile phone calls, the kind of user in a certain territory. So, for example, we have a resident, which is a person that lives and works in the same area, while a commuter is a person that lives in an area and works in a different area, and so visitor and transit. Of course, to compute this classification, we don't need the punctual information about when a phone call is performed, what is its duration, and other info, how many calls a person done in, for example, a specific morning. But we can generalize this kind of data. For example, we can discriminate only between weekends and working days. But also we can aggregate time slot in, for example, 3 different time slots: morning, afternoon, and evening and night. So once we have this kind of aggregate information, this profile of phone calls, we are still able to predict, for example, if a person is a visitor, because a visitor will perform some phone call in specific, not in specific amount of time, but then disappear forever. So we can still predict that is a visitor in the area. Once we have this information, we can assume a certain background knowledge that an adversary can have and simulate what happens if an attacker tries to identify a specific subject in a dataset. So we have here 2 examples. In the above example, the adversary have information, in this case, about 2 weeks of phone calls about this target. And with this information is able to correctly identify its target. While if the adversary has only partial information, cannot be sure if, for example, a subject is the first or the third one depicted in the dataset. So we can iterate this process, and we can generalize this in this so-called privacy risk evaluation task, where we classify each user in a specific dataset, computing their privacy risk. So we can have, for example, low risk, medium risk, or high risk users. And this can be done once we define the dimension of the data. So, for example, the time slot in which we want to aggregate the data and the amount of information that the attacker has. We can simulate the attack given all the possible combination in order to have a global vision, like in the plot in the figure, that specify the actual situation or the whole dataset. So clearly, this is only an example, but you can find other methods already developed available at the Subit Data Catalog. Here is the link, and I strongly encourage you to have a look to both methods and datasets that are available. And of course, also to the online course that we developed to give an overview of our ethical value. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesca and Joseph. Your examples were very important for us. There is, after this panel, we know that there is the trust that comes from how the digital technology is designed, and the trust that comes from the way regulation is done. If there is coherence and alignment between regulations or not. This final remark that was made by Giovanni Comandé will lead us to the next panel. Thank you, and let's go to the next panel.